What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, 2 weeks ago, we came out with our free agency preview video. Last week, we went over the top running backs set to hit free agency and the best landing spots. And now, this week, we have our wide receiver free agency breakdown video. In this video, we are going to be going over the top 10 wide receiver free agents set to hit the market. We'll discuss the top landing spots that do make sense for them, also throwing out a sleeper team that may be in the mix for nabbing them as well, while also outlining which of these teams would be the best fit for the highest upside in fantasy. Admittedly, last week's video was a bit lengthy. I'll do my best to shorten it up in any way possible for this week, but before we do jump into that, just a quick shout out. If you do enjoy this series, you do enjoy these videos, all you need to do to show support is just hit that like button. It really helps us out, lets you know you do enjoy the content we're putting out. And one last shout out is that pre-order pricing for our draft package is available now. You can go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. The link is in the description box below. And if you go there, you will notice that the 2021 draft package is now available for pre-order. And if you do purchase it while pre-order pricing is available, you can get 15% off by using code FFA at checkout. With all of that out of the way though, let's hop right into the video. The best place to start is to just take a look at the top 10 wide receivers that we're going to be discussing today. These are going to be the top 10 players at that position set to hit the market. Of course, some of these players could and are likely going to re-sign with their team. If I do feel like that is a strong possibility, I will note that while going over them, but for the most part, just to make things interesting, we are going to be using the assumption that each player is going to be exiting in free agency. One thing I will say about this year's free agency wide receiver class is that it is very strong and very deep. There are a mix of veterans as well as wide receivers coming into their first real major contract after their rookie deals, and the level of talent for each of these players, it not only varies greatly, but it also is extremely high. Each of the players you see listed here has or has been at one time the leader in targets for their team and has the opportunity to continue that trend, stepping into a new role on a new team within the NFL. Without further ado though, we might as well start right at the top with the top wide receiver free agent set to hit the market, none other than Allen Robinson, formerly of the Chicago Bears. When it comes to Allen Robinson, this has been a consistent top 12 producer since entering the league. Yes, he's had his ups and downs, but one thing that we have noticed from Allen Robinson is that despite him changing teams and having many different quarterbacks throwing him the ball throughout his career, he's been able to consistently produce at a high level. He has quickly acclimated to new offenses each time given the opportunity, and in each new offense that he has had the ability to join, he has increased the overall upside for that offense, and there's nothing indicating that we should expect otherwise from him when he makes his transition for 2021. Now, the amount of teams that are going to be interested in him are going to be pretty high, but the amount of teams that could actually nab him are going to be quite thin. For starters, it's undeniable that Allen Robinson is going to garner a top 5 to top 10 level contract when we're talking money. Not many teams in the NFL have the cap space or the ability to even offer him that contract. And then on the other side of things, not many teams are needing a bona fide wide receiver one, a true possession receiver for their offense. No, some teams, they just need role players, and Allen Robinson, his skill set ranges a bit more wide than that of just a role player. One team in specific that I believe has a desperate need to fill this possession receiver role definitely has to come down to the New York Giants. The New York Giants struggled mightily with Daniel Jones under center, dealing with a plethora of banged up receivers, including Evan Engram, Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard, and Darius Slayton. Now, admittedly, each one of those receivers did step up at times, but it felt like they had no consistency game over game, nor did they have a receiver that they could consistently rely on down the stretch, and that is exactly the type of role that Allen Robinson could step in and immediately fill. One thing I will say though is that the New York Giants don't have a ton of cap space to maneuver around. They will have to do a bit of juggling in order to get him on the team, but there's no doubt that they will be strongly in the mix when trying to nab A-Rob off of free agency. Another team that we have seen struggling at wide receiver, searching for their true wide receiver one in their offense, is the Baltimore Ravens. The closest thing that they have to that in their current offense comes down to Marquise Brown, who not only has been dealing with injuries himself, but lacks a bit of the more dynamic aspect that we're looking for in a number one wide receiver, something that Allen Robinson brings to the table. I could only imagine the type of upside that could come from a Lamar Jackson-led offense with Allen Robinson running deep downfield. Couple A-Rob with players like Marquise Brown as well as Mark Andrews, and the Lamar Jackson-led Baltimore Ravens would be a threat offensively to compete with any team amongst the NFL. Now, the last team I have listed here as a possible top candidate for A-Rob to land in definitely has to be New England. We know one thing about New England is that their quarterback situation comes with a ton of question marks. Last year, their quarterback room was led by Cam Newton, who had one of the worst passing attacks in the entire league. And while they will be moving away from Cam Newton in favor of a quarterback with potentially more passing upside, how much success can we really expect from their new quarterback if they're not going to support him with a strong cast of wide receivers? Yes, Jacoby Myers showed a lot of promise, and there were also other wide receivers that stepped up at times, but it's undeniable that even if you operate in a run-first offense, you can't expect to have too much consistent success if you are not a threat whatsoever in your passing attack. Lastly, for some sleeper teams, I'll throw the New York Jets out there. We could also add in the Miami Dolphins. These are two teams that do have plenty of cap space available to work with, so they do have the means to get A-Rob on the team. My only concern or reasons why I don't believe that this would be a perfect fit is that they do have younger players on Miami like Devontae Parker and Preston Williams who fit a similar skill set to that of A-Rob. And as for the New York Jets, players like Denzel Mims, who showed a lot of promise himself, whose development would be heavily mitigated by the signing and acquisition of Allen Robinson. For that, I do consider them more of sleepers because yes, like I mentioned, they do have the means, but it wouldn't make a ton of sense for the signing. With that said, we're moving over to the next player, which is Chris Godwin out of Tampa Bay. Chris Godwin is a candidate that I feel is a strong re-sign candidate. We know that after them winning the Super Bowl, Bruce Arians already came forward and said that he is heavily interested in re-signing Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin already showing that mutual interest himself, and with Tom Brady already noted as slated to return himself, why would we try to break apart the offensive pieces that you found so much success with this past season? Outside of the possibility of Chris Godwin re-signing with Tampa Bay, there are a few teams, if not many teams, that should be interested in the market for Chris Godwin to sign with. Up top, the New England Patriots, who we had already mentioned, desperately needs to fill talent at the wide receiver position, and with Chris Godwin having the ability to play both in the slot as well as outside, having that type of versatility is going to be an admirable trait, especially for a team like the New England Patriots. In addition, with the New England Patriots always looking out for the next best deal, Chris Godwin could be a player who some teams look at with a couple of question marks just due to the fact that he did play alongside Mike Evans, played in an offense with Jameis Winston, who threw for 5,000 yards that year. So if some teams do have some question marks on whether Chris Godwin is worth top wide receiver money, I don't believe the New England Patriots would be the type of team to second guess his value. I do believe, though, another AFC East team could be in the market for Chris Godwin. That is the Miami Dolphins. We had already mentioned that both Preston Williams and Devontae Parker fit a similar type of role to that of Allen Robinson. With Chris Godwin being a more versatile player, a player we've seen take a heavy snap share out of the slot, I could certainly see him fitting into that role, being a safety valve for Tua to help acclimate him to the NFL level, something that could be very valuable for that Miami Dolphins team. Also, with Tampa Bay and Miami being very geographically close, if Chris Godwin is ultimately going to exit in free agency, he may value not having to uproot himself across the country to stay in the state that he had become accustomed to. So if he does leave Tampa Bay, Miami may be a top destination for him to consider. Outside of that, I could see the Washington football team being a team that could throw a lot of money at him, and with Terry McLaurin being the only real talent they have at the wide receiver position, I could see Terry McLaurin and Chris Godwin playing a 1-2 punch for whichever quarterback is going to lead this Washington football team for 2021. There is no doubt it would be a significant upgrade over anything that they had brought to the table in the 2020 season. Now, one last sleeper team that I will throw out there definitely has to be the Indianapolis Colts, with T.Y. Hilton set to hit free agency himself and potentially re-sign with the team, as well as Michael Pittman stepping into that wide receiver 2 slot for this offense. This team still has a desperate need to fill at the wide receiver receiver position and a potential slot role. That's not to say that the health of T.Y. Hilton is something that we can rely on ourselves. He also could leave in free agency himself, and with Chris Godwin's versatility to play both outside and in the slot has to be something that the Indianapolis Colts are going to greatly value as they bring in a brand new quarterback for the 2021 season. Alright guys, we're moving over to the third wide receiver off of our board. We have Kenny Golladay, formerly of the Detroit Lions. Now, Kenny Golladay certainly could be a player that re-signs with the Detroit Lions. I'm not really sure if that would make a ton of sense just due to the moves that the teams have made so far this offseason. As we know, the blockbuster trade between the LA Rams and Detroit Lions sending Matthew Stafford for Jared Goff, it does indicate that this team is going to be in somewhat of a rebuild mode, which does make me question what their willingness would be in bringing back Kenny Golladay for this upcoming season. If Kenny Golladay does exit to free agency, a lot of the teams that we had listed as interested in Allen Robinson are also going to be in the market for Kenny Golladay. Two of the top teams we had in the market for Allen Robinson, Baltimore Ravens and New York Giants, are also going to be two of the top teams we have interested in Kenny Golladay. Both of those teams are missing a bona fide wide receiver one, a true outside and possession wide receiver like Kenny Golladay, which means that Kenny Golladay could be a perfect fit for those types of offenses. Both of those teams could potentially afford him as well. We know with the New York Giants having Sterling Shepard and Golden Tate, they're certainly lacking what Kenny Golladay brings to the table. But outside of those two teams, it is interesting to know that if you ask yourself which team in the NFL should be interested in signing a player like Kenny Golladay, when you look at the Detroit Lions and what their team needs are, bringing in a new young quarterback that has struggled at times in Jared Goff, question marks as to whether they're going to re-sign Marvin Jones or not, and the level of talent at the wide receiver position outside of him, the Detroit Lions would make a ton of sense to re-sign Kenny Golladay. Of course, that would be outside of the fact that they are going to be in full rebuild mode, but up until this point, that's really remained to be determined. For those reasons though, I do believe those are going to be the three top teams, and one other team you could throw in there definitely has to be the Indianapolis Colts. I do see a similar skill set with Michael Pittman as well as Kenny Golladay though. I believe that the signing would have to come on the back of an exit of T.Y. Hilton in free agency, but we can't rule out any of those being possibilities because the Indianapolis Colts are one quarterback and one top free agent wide receiver away from potentially making a solid run in the playoffs themselves. One last team I'm going to throw out there as a sleeper team, a team a lot of people are not talking about potentially being in the mix for wide receiver, and for potentially good reason. They do have talent at that position, but yes, to me, it has to be the Jacksonville Jaguars. As we know, the Jacksonville Jaguars are slated to bring in new rookie quarterback Trevor Lawrence. What better way to acclimate your new quarterback to the NFL than to supply him with as many top tier receiving talents as you possibly can? Moving on to the final tier 1 wide receiver in the free agency market this year has to be Will Fuller of the Houston Texans. Now, a lot of people may call into question on whether Will Fuller is a tier 1 talent or not, and I believe a lot of those questions should have been answered when we saw the type of upside he brought prior to his suspension last season. Through 11 games, Will Fuller was able to compile 879 receiving yards on 53 receptions to go along with 8 touchdowns. These are definitely numbers that we shouldn't look past, and before he was taken out with suspension for PEDs, he was on pace to be one of the top wide receivers in the NFL. Now, I do believe because he did suffer that PED suspension, he also has been dealing with injuries throughout his career. He is going to be coming at a major discount when it comes to free agency, which means now he could be in the mix of teams that don't have as much cap space available. Leading this list definitely has to be the Green Bay Packers, who have already previously shown interest in Will Fuller. For that, they definitely have to rank as one of the top landing spots for Will Fuller for this upcoming offseason. And I could only imagine pairing a player like Will Fuller to a player like Devontae Adams, as well as Robert Tonyan, MVS, and Aaron Rodgers throwing him the football. The amount of upside that this Green Bay Packers offense could bring to the table, I mean, basically the sky is the limit. One major concern and wrench that could be thrown in that, of course, is the available cap space that the Green Bay Packers have. They don't have very much of it, but also, like I said, the discount that's going to be coming for a player like Will Fuller is going to be much greater than the discount allotted for many of the other free agent wide receivers. Another location I could see him fitting in just well with definitely has to be with the Washington football team. I believe the Washington football team may be one of the teams able to offer him the most amount of money, and with his previous injury history, I think him seeking the money could be a route that he could possibly take. Pairing a player like Will Fuller with a young and and developing player like Terry McLaurin would not just make Terry McLaurin afraid he could potentially lose his job as the top receiving talent on that team, but no, they could play a 1A, 1B type role, developing the skill set that of Terry McLaurin while bringing in a new quarterback and supplying their new quarterback with plenty of talent at the wide receiver position. I do have the Houston Texans also listed here as a team potentially interested in re-signing. Now, we did know that Deshaun Watson may have been a player to leave in free agency, but now all signs are pointing to Deshaun Watson staying, and with that, why not bring back some of the talent that helped him succeed for the 2020 season? Outside of that though, I do see one other suitor potentially being in the mix, that being the New England Patriots. One thing we do know about the Patriots way is to find discounts on players that have the top tier talent and be able to extract that talent out of them as soon as they are on your team. There's no denying that Will Fuller, a player who has never caught more than 53 receptions in an entire season, a player who has never eclipsed 900 receiving yards. One thing we do have to understand about Will Fuller is that we truly haven't seen his full potential. When it comes to the New England Patriots, one thing they are best at is bringing the maximum talent out of their players, giving them the opportunity to reach their full potential. And with Will Fuller being a player who we really haven't seen reach his full potential, the New England Patriots may see that as a potential way to get a discount on a player that we know has top tier wide receiver talent, but really hasn't been able to put it all together. One last sleeper team I will mention is the Philadelphia Eagles, and I understand that they don't have enough money to pay virtually anybody, but one thing we do know is that they are trying to move players around, players like Carson Wentz, players like Zach Ertz, to players that have significant cap hits coming up this upcoming year. If they are able to move away from either of those two players, the amount of funds that they could have to put towards a free agent wide receiver would certainly be enough to nab a player like Will Fuller, and with the disparity that they did have at the wide receiver position last season, I definitely see this as a heavy position of need for them. Alright guys, we're moving over to JuJu Smith-Schuster of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, unfortunately, Pittsburgh is likely going to be moving away from JuJu Smith-Schuster, and no, it's not because he doesn't have enough talent to be on their roster this upcoming year. They are just in a really big cap crunch, and unfortunately, JuJu Smith-Schuster is going to be a cap casualty. With JuJu Smith-Schuster slated to exit in free agency though, the number of teams that are going to be interested in him are going to be a bit thinner than that of some of the previous wide receivers I had mentioned. And no, it's not because his contract is going to garner a very high amount. No, it's more because he is going to be playing more of a role player, that of a wide receiver playing primarily from the slot. A couple of teams I could see interested in looking for a slot receiver definitely have to be the Baltimore Ravens as well as Washington Football Team, with the Baltimore Ravens having Marquise Brown playing from the outside and the Washington Football Team already having Terry McLaurin. I could see JuJu Smith-Schuster playing in a role in those offenses where he's going to play on virtually every snap while also not interfering with the development of their young and up-and-coming receivers. I could see a similar situation panning out for the New York Jets, who have Denzel Mims, and yes, I understand they have Jamison Crowder on the roster, but Jamison Crowder himself could be a cap casualty. If they cut Jamison Crowder, they could save $7 million in cap space. That $7 million could be enough to offset any acquisition charges that they face with acquiring JuJu Smith-Schuster. But another fit I could see making a ton of sense is to bring him over to Miami, where he would fit in nicely with a trio of Devontae Parker and Preston Williams. Obviously, we have Tua, who is going to be a young and developing quarterback himself, and what better way to help develop your quarterback faster than to provide him with a solid safety valve out of the slot, and what better player than that of JuJu Smith-Schuster to fill that role of need. Now, one team I do have listed as more of a sleeper definitely has to be the New England Patriots. As we know, we do have Julian Edelman slated to return, but Julian Edelman, he hasn't really been the poster child for health, and we know that they are going to be looking to develop a new slot player for this offense to lead this team from that position in the future. We certainly know that the New England Patriots do have enough cap to make that a reality, but the question is more on if they do value that as a position of need right now when they do have a temporary stopgap in that of Julian Edelman. Alright guys, we're moving over to Corey Davis, who had his best season as a pro in the 2020 season. In just 14 games, he compiled 65 receptions for 984 yards to go along with 5 touchdowns, and that type of production does garner a lot of interest for him in free agency. I don't believe a team is going to be in the market to bring him in to be their bona fide solidified wide receiver one for their team, although we can't rule it out. But if we are going to move forward with the notion that a team is going to bring him in to potentially play a 1A, 1B type situation, similarly to what he played in his most successful year out of Tennessee, I definitely could see teams like the Washington football team and the Green Bay Packers being top teams trying to acquire Corey Davis for this upcoming year. Green Bay Packers, of course, having Devontae Adams leading their offensive passing attack, Washington football team having Terry McLaurin. There's no doubt that adding Corey Davis to either of these rosters isn't going to hinder any development of any younger receivers, while also being a major boost to each team offensively. Don't get me wrong though, I do believe the best situation for Corey Davis would be re-signing with Tennessee. He has now finally been able to find his footing. He has now built and developed a very strong connection with quarterback Ryan Tannehill, something that he will have to rebuild with any new offense or quarterback he joins. One last landing spot I think could be very likely is going to be the New England Patriots, who have historically liked to take discounts on players, and with Corey Davis being a former first-round pick, a player who has overall not really panned out based on his draft stock, but did show the promise and the ability to actually do it, the New England Patriots could be the type of team to be able to see those qualities in him and think that they could bring out the best in him, and with him being a potential discount over the other wide receivers in free agency, all of those reasons combined for why I believe the New England Patriots could be strong candidates in the market for Corey Davis this year. Outside of those teams, one sleeper team I definitely see as the Jacksonville Jaguars. Corey Davis' skill set is something that I don't think that the Jacksonville Jaguars currently have on their roster, and with them slated to bring in Trevor Lawrence with the top pick overall in the NFL draft, supplying him with as many weapons in the receiving game is definitely something that could help him in his developmental process. Moving on to the next wide receiver set to hit the free agency market, I have Marvin Jones, currently of the Detroit Lions. Now, Marvin Jones is definitely a player that could re-sign with Detroit. I don't think his contract is going to garner any sort of high amount, which means the number of teams that could potentially be interested in him are going to be much higher, but the role and the skill set of that of Marvin Jones is pretty thin itself. Any team interested in acquiring Marvin Jones definitely has to be interested in acquiring an outside wide receiver, which does eliminate quite a few teams from that. However, that's not to say that many teams in the NFL currently don't have a need to fill an outside wide receiver role. I believe at the top of that list has to be the New York Giants. The New York Giants themselves also are in a bit of a cap struggle themselves, making Marvin Jones one of the perfect fits, in my opinion, for them to tackle in free agency. Now, the Miami Dolphins, they may not necessarily need an outside wide receiver with players like Preston Williams and Devontae Parker on the roster, but one thing that they are lacking a bit of is some speed, and that is certainly something that Marvin Jones brings to the table. As for the New England Patriots, we have definitely established that with Julian Edelman returning, them having some stability from the role of the slot, having an outside presence to go alongside with Jacoby Myers could be very beneficial for whatever new quarterback they bring in. And with the New England Patriots usually being pretty smart with how they allocate their cap funds, Marvin Jones definitely could be a player I see high up on their free agency board. Outside of that though, there is one team I definitely see in the market for them, but that is going to rely on an exit of a current impending free agent, that being T.Y. Hilton. If T.Y. Hilton does exit from the Indianapolis Colts team, I could see this team in desperate need to fill an outside slash speedster type of role, a role that could be perfectly filled by a player like Marvin Jones, and you're really not losing much when it comes to age or health. As for one sleeper team that could potentially be in the mix for Marvin Jones, I have the San Francisco 49ers. Now, the San Francisco 49ers, they aren't short for talent at the wide receiver position, but one thing that they are lacking is an outside presence outside of Deebo Samuel, and with the health that Deebo Samuel has been able to show us over the past 2 seasons, they may need to get in another player just as a backup plan. Now, the San Francisco 49ers aren't a team that has a ton of cap space able to allot to a free agent wide receiver, and with all of the receivers on their team currently being pretty young themselves, having a veteran to have that leadership in the locker room could definitely be something that they value at the wide receiver position. Alright guys, up next we have Curtis Samuel, formerly of the Carolina Panthers. One thing we have to understand about Curtis Samuel is the exact role that he's likely going to play on any new offense he joins. That is going to be more of a gadget type player role, somebody who is going to get a limited number of targets, but somebody who can also do wonders with his yards yards after catch ability, somebody who can also get carries out of the backfield. And when looking for teams that fit that team need mold, there are fewer teams that fit it better than the Washington football team. Washington football team was targeting players like JD McKissick very heavily down the stretch. They also struggled to get a wide receiver involved consistently outside of Terry McLaurin. And with the versatility of a player like Curtis Samuel, where you can line him up in many positions around the field, this gives them the flexibility to draft other players at skill positions of need and be able to fill in Curtis Samuel to fit in around them. Now, two other teams that do already have their main receivers in their offense but could use players to be more of a change of pace style wide receiver definitely has to be the Green Bay Packers as well as the Miami Dolphins. We've already talked multiple times about the team needs of the wide receivers for the Green Bay Packers as well as Miami Dolphins, so no need to go super in depth with them, but just know that Curtis Samuel would not be brought in to overtake any of the wide receivers, but more to be a change of pace type player. Now, one other team I don't believe is really being talked about in the market for Curtis Samuel definitely has to be the San Francisco 49ers. We can't rule them out because Curtis Samuel is actually the perfect fit for a Kyle Shanahan offense. One thing we do know about Kyle Shanahan and exactly how he likes to get his players involved is he likes to target them in space, get the ball in their hands, and let them do most of the work with their yards after catch ability. If that doesn't scream Curtis Samuel to you, then I must be crazy, but one other sleeper team I think that could be in the market for Curtis Samuel has to be the Philadelphia Eagles. One thing we do know is that they are very strapped for cap, but one other thing we know is that they desperately need to fill a wide receiver position, and with most of the wide receivers like Travis Fulgham, Alshon Jeffrey on their team being more possession type receivers, having a difference maker like Curtis Samuel on the field, somebody that could be a spark for that offense, could do wonders, and we know that they currently are trying to trade away pieces like Carson Wentz as well as Zach Ertz. We do have one final wide receiver, and I'm not going to take too much time on him because it's unlikely he's going to have any sort of fantasy impact, but this is going to be AJ Green of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, when it comes to AJ Green, I can't see many teams trying to target him to fill anything more than a sort of veteran leadership type of role for their offense. So in that search of that type of role, I'm looking for teams that are close to making a championship, close to making a playoff run, but lacking some veteran leadership or maybe an outside presence. A few teams that fall in line with that definitely have to be the Green Bay Packers, one game away from the Super Bowl appearance themselves, Kansas City and Tampa Bay, who made it to the Super Bowl, but also teams that could be losing top tier players in free agency at the wide receiver position. Even if he is added to those offenses, my expectations for him aren't all that high. An offense where I could see them potentially use him a bit more has to be from the New England Patriots, who have shown in the past to take players that are a bit over the hill, and AJ Green fits that mold to a T. Now, one sleeper team I will admit though definitely has to be the New York Giants, and this one I'm not expecting them to put all of their eggs in this one basket. This would probably be a depth piece for them, also utilized for his veteran leadership. But one thing we do know about this New York Giants team is that they are a bit strapped for cap, and they do have a desperate need to fill an outside wide receiver role. I do of course think this is the least likely destination for AJ Green, but a destination I could definitely see plausible nonetheless. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.